Even though Joe Burrow and the Bengals weren't participating on Championship Sunday, it was a reminder about how talented Joe Burrow really is. Hi again, everyone, and welcome in to Enter the Jungle right here on Cincinnati Bengals Talk and Bally Sports, part of the Big Play Network. We are every single Tuesday night at 8 Eastern on the YouTube channel Cincinnati Bengals Talk and multiple times a week on Bally Sports. I'll be joined by Andrew Fox Miller coming up in just a bit. We have a ton to get to, including new Bengals offensive coordinator Dan Pitcher. You'll hear from him later in the show. New Titans head coach and former Bengals OC Brian Callahan. You'll hear from him later in the show. But before we get to that, let's get to Championship Sunday. Because Championship Sunday, well, we saw the Chiefs advance to the Super Bowl in Super Bowl 58 in Las Vegas, and we saw the 49ers. And whether you were happy or sad about that, and I'm sure most of the people watching were rooting for the Detroit Lions for, well, obvious reasons, whether it's Super Bowl history or the fact that the Bengals are rivals with the Chiefs and Ravens, Sunday was a reminder of how talented Joe Burrow truly is, was, and the difference that he makes. And let's just start with Patrick Mahomes, who undoubtedly is the best quarterback on the planet. He's one of the best athletes on the planet. I don't think anyone would debate that. I don't think Joe Burrow would, Lamar Jackson would, Josh Allen, whoever you want to say is in the running for top quarterback. I think everyone agrees right now that it's Patrick Mahomes. But there are two men on the planet that have led their teams, two quarterbacks that have led their teams past Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. One's Tom Brady, retired. A lot of people consider him the GOAT, including myself. Andrew Fox Miller hopefully agrees. 7 rings. And now there's the GOAT debates between Mahomes and Brady, even though that's silly at this point of Mahomes' career. But the other one, well, he resides right here in the Queen City. It's Joe Burrow. And that's what's interesting to me, is talented as Lamar Jackson is, and he's going to win his second MVP. As awesome as Josh Allen is, throwing off platform and doing all the things that Josh Allen can do, running the ball and running through linebackers, and he's just so physically gifted, throwing behind his back, over his head, 55 yards down the field on a frozen rope. Well, no, Joe Burrow can't do that. No, he doesn't run a 4.3 40-yard dash like Lamar Jackson. And he's also the only active quarterback that's beat Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. He's the only guy that will go into Arrowhead and not blink and be able to win and get it done, and is 3-1 against Patrick Mahomes, 1-1 in the postseason in AFC championship games. Say what you want, but I think Championship Sunday was a reminder of how talented Joe Burrow was and where this Bengals team could, would, maybe will be next year at this time. And maybe you don't believe me. Maybe you don't fully buy in. Well, let's just look at the San Francisco 49ers. What happened when the Bengals traveled there earlier this season? They played their best game of the year, and it was a game that was really never in doubt as Cincinnati cruised. Joe Burrow probably played his best game of the year. He was running for first downs and certainly looking like the Joe Burrow that we expect him to look like. And so, yes, it stinks watching the playoffs. I'm sure it was painful watching Chiefs, Ravens for a lot of you watching now, and Detroit just totally melting down late in a game they probably should have won against the 49ers in the NFC Championship game. I get that. But also understand, Cincinnati, Bengals fans everywhere, that things, they're looking pretty good because you have the one guy that will never blink against Patrick Mahomes. And it's the one guy that has a real shot, I think, to beat Patrick Mahomes anytime he's on the field going up against him. This was supposed to be a Chiefs down year where the offense, oh man, these receivers stink. How are they going to find ways to move the ball? And the Chiefs have done kind of what I expected them to do in the postseason. Lean on the run game, lean on their defense, and Mahomes will make plays when needed. Cleveland native and former UC Bearcat Travis Kelce, man, he balled out on Sunday. And so there's still weapons. There's no doubt. Patrick Mahomes has weapons, but he's special. And there's, as of right now, and maybe that'll change in 2 weeks with Brock Purdy, I could totally see the 49ers winning Super Bowl 58. But for now, there's one quarterback that has taken down Patrick Mahomes that is still active in this league, and it's Joe Burrow. He's the only one that's beaten him in the playoffs. And if you're a Bengals fan, that should make you smile because that means you have a shot each and every week to win, assuming he can stay healthy, which is a topic for another day. But he's continuing to recover. He is moving in the right direction. All signs are positive when it comes to his wrist injury. He was in Aspen for the X Games over the weekend, and who knows? Maybe next year he'll be part of a AFC championship game here in Cincinnati where the Bengals could potentially host it and advance to Super Bowl 59. Up next, let's talk and hear from one of the more important pieces of Joe Burrow's offensive staff, new Bengals offensive coordinator Dan Pitcher. Plus, we'll bring in Andrew Fox Miller as well to get his reaction to the Bengals' newest member of Zach Taylor's coaching staff. Welcome back to Enter the Jungle. I'm James Rapien. Andrew Fox Miller will join me in just a second. Real quick on Dan Pitcher, the Bengals' new offensive coordinator. And he was introduced on Thursday of last week. Something we knew a lot about, knew that he was the favorite to get the job, but until he gets the job, you just never know. And we've covered some of this on Cincinnati Bengals Talk, certainly. But the overwhelming thought for me, and I put out a poll question, and over 90% of people on social media were pleased with the hire, but sometimes the right decision is the obvious one. Not always, but sometimes. And I think the Bengals knew that was the case when it came to Dan Pitcher and Brian Callahan, who you'll hear from coming up in just a bit. When it became pretty clear he was going to get a head coaching job, I think the Bengals knew, okay, can we figure it out? Can we make it work where we promote Dan Pitcher before he takes one of these other offensive coordinator jobs? And the timing worked out really well. He had multiple interviews elsewhere, but the Bengals were able to keep him in town. And I think it was a great hire. Let's welcome in Andrew Fox Miller. Andrew, what was your reaction to the Dan Pitcher news, everything that played out? Obviously, we covered it on Cincinnati Bengals Talk, but I think some were underwhelmed by the hire. They were thinking big names. Others really liked it. What'd you think?
I wouldn't say underwhelmed at all. It was, for me, expected. I think maybe just being part of hearing the conversations and the speculation, I think a lot of people, like you said, it was sort of the obvious one to me. Had it not been him, I think I would have had more questions. You don't miss a beat, right? You got the same people within this organization deserving. And it seems like Zach Taylor is happy with the hire too. I think that they've got already an existing relationship that's going to bode well for this offense moving forward.
I think the most ridiculous narrative, by the way, that's out there right now, and it's small, and I'm speaking to a small minority, just to be very clear. But there are some that are like, Zach just promoted Dan Pitcher so he can keep calling plays. And that's so stupid because I think Zach is pretty flexible. And if he truly thought the best thing for this team was to give up play calling, I think he would do that. I also think that Zach looked at Dan Pitcher last year and said, I'm comfortable promoting you to offensive coordinator last year. I really do. And Brian came back and he didn't get a head coaching job despite interviewing for multiple different spots. And so to keep Dan this past year, even though he could have went to Tampa Bay potentially to be their offensive coordinator, there was interest across the league. I think that was huge for him. And you mentioned the continuity part of it. And I agree. I don't think this was just as business as usual. The Bengals have done business as usual coordinator hires. Ken Zampese was promoted from quarterbacks coach to offensive coordinator in 2016, I want to say. And that did not go well. And in fact, it was 2016. I know for a fact he was not their first choice. And it was kind of one of those things where they were looking around and he was like, hey, pick me, pick me, pick me. I've been here long enough. I've served my time. It's time for me to be OC. And so they go that route and it didn't work. And they went to Bill Lazor very, very quickly in the Ken Zampese era. But I know how that feels. This feels much, much different. And it also has Joe Burrow's approval. Joe Burrow saying, quote, our relationship is as good as it gets. I wouldn't be the player I am today without him. He's been preparing for this for years. He takes his job very seriously and does it with a lot of passion. That was a statement Burrow gave to the Bengals on the hire. I'm told Burrow very much in on the process, wanted to keep Dan Pitcher in Cincinnati. The Saints, Raiders, Patriots, all interested in him for their offensive coordinator position. And so Dan was naturally asked what it was like to hear the praise from Joe Burrow and receive Joe Burrow's endorsement.
knew that he felt that way, but it's always good when people express those things. Listen, I love Joe. Joe and I we've been tied at the hip from the moment he came in this building. I was hired into that role 2 months prior to that, and I couldn't have asked for a more ideal situation, and I love the fact that I get to keep working with him.
Makes total sense to me. Love the fact that I get to keep working with him, and it's kind of funny because they've grown up together in a sense. Dan Pitcher was promoted to Bengals quarterbacks coach in January of 2020. A few months later, what happened? Oh, Joe Burrow was the number 1 overall pick in the 2020 NFL draft, and the rest is history. Anytime you make a decision that keeps Joe Burrow happy, given with where we started this show, as he's the only guy as of now that has beat Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. He's 5-1 combined when you look at Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen against those two guys, two of the studs in the AFC and top quarterbacks. You want to make him happy. You want to keep him happy. And I think that's a factor. I don't think it was the biggest factor. I think Dan Pitcher being qualified was the biggest factor, but certainly a factor in the Bengals' decision.
Yeah, you say business as usual. That's not what this is. But this is Burrow's business as usual. BAU, Burrow as usual is what we're going to be going by the standard for this team, I think. And it's all good things. And speaking of narrative, Pitcher, who makes what here? Is Burrow making Pitcher look good? That's a narrative that I would kind of think that Browning alone maybe squashed a bit, right?
Sure. That's a good point. It's a really good point because Jake Browning was literally making history while he was starting for the Bengals, and they went 4-3 down the stretch. And look, can Browning hide a bad defense or hide flaws on offense when you do have those flaws? No, not always. Not like Joe Burrow. But he did show that he could be a competent starting quarterback and prove that he could have a winning record for a significant stretch. So, yeah, Dan Pitcher deserves a ton of credit for that. And that's one thing Zach Taylor, I think as well, he hasn't hesitated to give his guys credit when asked. And long before Pitcher was ever even in the mix for the OC job, because it was Brian Callahan's. And knowing that if he praises Pitcher, teams around the league will see that and potentially try to steal Pitcher from them. So I think Zach deserves credit and just being real about what his staff does and how valuable they are. But what is going to change on offense? I certainly think that that's interesting. What's the ceiling of this Bengals offense with Zach Taylor, Dan Pitcher, the Bengals' new OC, and Joe Burrow? It seems like Dan has really, really high expectations, and I think this is, rightfully so. Here's Dan Pitcher on how good this Bengals offense can be.
I mentioned the word adaptability before. It's something I believe in completely, and you need to have the ability to pivot in a moment's notice, given different constraints that might be placed on you. So I can't sit here and say I see the offense moving in this specific direction. Listen, we've had a very good offense. We've dealt with some issues, particularly this past season, that made life a little bit harder on us than we were used to. But I fully believe in the foundation that we have and that we have the people in place to be one of the top offenses in football.
And that's my expectation. I'm sure that's your expectation. That's everyone's expectation that's watching. They should be one of the top offenses in football. And I think they were about to get there this year. During that 5-week stretch, including the loss to the Texans, where they win 4 straight, they get to 5-3, and then they lose to the Texans. They were working pretty well on offense. You have the Joe Burrow bow and arrow celebration where he's down on one knee at Paycor after throwing the touchdown, just a dot to Trenton Irwin, by the way, against the Texans. And it's like, oh, they're going to roll. And obviously they lost that day, and then Burrow gets hurt 4 days later and is gone for the season. But expectations remain high for this Bengals offense. One thing a lot of people are wondering is how it could potentially change. And I thought it was interesting how Dan Pitcher is approaching the offense. And he mentioned adaptability. This is another clip of him discussing how willing he will be to tweak game plans and change on the fly.
You can kind of zoom out and look at the big picture of who you want to be as an offense. When you get into the season, and Zach does such an amazing job of this, it's really about who do we have to be in a given week to beat the team that we need to play. And that takes into account constraints that you may have within your own building, and then who are we facing? And I just think we do such a good job of that. So, there's been a lot made of what did the offense look like over the final part of the season, and I really just think that's a product of us looking at it on a week-to-week basis. Who do we have available to us? Who are we playing, and what do we need to do to win? And that's something we'll always do. And so we'll look at some of those things that we did well at the end of the year, and certainly Joe Burrow is capable of doing anything you ask him to do. And so that's what we'll do this offseason, is do a great job of deciding who we need to be moving forward, and then have the adaptability to adjust if we need to.
I think the key there, Andrew, is at the end. Joe Burrow has the ability to do whatever we ask him to do. Some don't think that he's capable of getting under center, and this past year when he was dealing with the calf injury, that was certainly an issue, but he's capable of that, and I expect to see some of that. Not a lot, but some of that moving forward.
And guess who would probably know that more than anyone other than Joe Burrow? Dan Pitcher. So I like the dynamic there. I like the opportunities it presents. This team, it starts to become this prevailing thought, especially when Burrow's not on the field, that they're underperforming for the personnel they have on the field. And I think from what we saw in that previous clip with Dan Pitcher, I think he was sort of saying, listen, we know the potential we have. He seems very, very aware of it. And sitting back and watching him speak, I think he presented himself well. I was impressed with him, and we'll see in September, but I like what they're doing here.
Multiple NFL stars have their eyes on Tee Higgins. The Bengals won't really let him leave in free agency this offseason, will they? Details on Higgins' future, what the Bengals could do to keep him in Cincinnati, and more coming up next, right here on Enter the Jungle. Welcome back to Enter the Jungle. He's Andrew Fox Miller. I'm James Rapien. And, well, Tee Higgins, it's the biggest offseason question facing this Bengals team. What happens with him? Will they use the franchise tag on him? Will they sign him to a long-term extension? Will he leave in free agency? Well, Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson is certainly hoping that Tee Higgins leaves in free agency, citing family ties because they do have the same agent in David Mulligetta as one of the many reasons why he should sign with the Cleveland Browns this offseason. Now, I'll be honest, Andrew, I don't think he gets to free agency. The Bengals have to make a decision on whether or not to use the franchise tag on him. Pretty sure the window's late February, like February 22nd through March 7th before free agency starts. But could you see this? Could you see Tee Higgins going up 71 and joining the Cleveland Browns?
Look, Deshaun Watson's going to say things. How are they going to afford him? I haven't even looked at the numbers, James. Like Deshaun Watson might be the reason they can't afford him, right?
It's affordable. You can always make the money.
I know, but come on.
This shows how talented he is, how he's viewed across the league. So as a Bengals fan, take it two ways. One, the Bengals are franchise tagging Tee Higgins. They will not let him test free agency. I'll just put it out there now. You can quote this and just cold take me forever if that happens. Two, he's valuable. He's valuable. Teams value him. Players respect his game, and they want him on their team. You know what that means? That he's valuable via trade, that he has trade value. Even though you might tag him, you could still trade him and trade him for something significant, which is something that the Bengals should certainly consider if they do franchise tag Tee Higgins and aren't confident they can get a long-term deal done. We'll see what happens. One team that could be interested is Brian Callahan's Tennessee Titans. Up next, his powerful farewell to the Cincinnati Bengals. The former Bengals offensive coordinator was named head coach of the Titans last week. You'll see what he said next on Enter the Jungle. Former Bengals offensive coordinator Brian Callahan is the new head coach of the Tennessee Titans. And usually it's a lot of coach speak with these interviews and these introductory press conferences. I think Brian Callahan was real down to the emotion that comes with being a head coach, and real to the emotion and looking at his journey in Cincinnati. He got emotional when talking about Mike Brown and the Bengals organization, an organization that stuck with him and Zach Taylor and this entire staff, despite a 6-25-1 start to their tenure in Cincinnati. Here's Brian Callahan's thank you to Mike Brown and the Bengals.
All right, I would like to thank the Cincinnati Bengals organization. Mike Brown, who is probably one of the greatest men that I've ever met. I'll get it together in a second. Don't worry. Katie and Troy Blackburn, their daughters Elizabeth and Caroline, and Duke Tobin and his staff. They gave me an incredible opportunity to grow, and they were patient, and they invested in me, and I'll forever be grateful for that. The next one, again, you can see how much these people mean to me. I'll get it together. All right. And then probably most importantly, Zach Taylor. He's a great friend. He's been an incredible mentor, and he's a fantastic football coach. Thank you for everything.
Andrew, it doesn't get much better than that. Real, down to every word he said. I think he's going to kill it in Nashville. I'm bummed that he's not still in Cincinnati, but when you're that real, players are going to respect you from the jump. He's an NFL lifer. I think he's going to crush it in Tennessee.
And how about the emotion? If you would have told me, and tell any Bengals fan 10, 15 years ago, offensive coordinator, any coach that had that level of emotion publicly thinking about how much this organization meant to them, I feel like more and more we've seen the way that this team, this culture has changed. And now we get a little bit of insight on really the relationships that the Brown family has built with their coaching, their staff. It's interesting now to see.
I said it's not business as usual early in the show, because when people hear that with the Bengals, they think 90s, and that's how they think. And that's what I mean by that. But Burrow as usual, it's a whole different ball game, baby. That's a whole different ball game. You're right. And that's part of why Cincinnati Bengals Talk, 40,000+ subscribers, is perfect for you. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. Check us out on Bally Sports. Shout out to the Big Play Network. And until next time, for Andrew Fox Miller, I'm James Rapien. Thank you so much for watching Enter the Jungle.